Well, welcome everybody. It's a great thrill to be able to introduce Mr. Charlie Munger to you. Well, I'm sure to many of you, he really doesn't need any introduction at all. Born in 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska. Charlie trained as a lawyer and actually was a very successful investor in his own right before teaming up with another Omaha native, Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. So since 1978, Charlie has been the vice chairman of Berkshire and is universally recognised as a key component of the long-term success of that company. I've been lucky enough to have known Charlie for about 25 years, and over that time have been continually amazed by his breadth of knowledge of virtually all subjects and his interest in the world in general, a true polymath. He has a great interest in education, the advancement of knowledge, and certainly in science. And so when I explained to him the mission of the Hearts and Minds Initiative, he was most supportive and agreed with us here today. So on behalf of all of us here in Australia, Charlie, thank you once again for being part of this discussion.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. My age, I'm glad to be anywhere.
Well, I can understand that. So, Charlie, we can explore a few very specific topics shortly. But firstly, you've seen and experienced a plethora of investment environments and markets over your nearly 98 years. Have you ever seen one like we are experiencing now?
No, I would say this is a little more extreme than anything I've ever. I think the dot-com boom was crazier in some of its valuations even than we have now. But overall, I consider this era even crazier than the dot-com area, the one that blew up in 2000.
Do you think it's still possible then to invest in the manner that you've made famous? You know, like identifying great businesses with long-term, almost inevitable growth and attractive unit economics, and
Well,
also selling. Sorry.
Of course, it's possible, but you have to pay a great deal more for the good companies now.
Yeah.
And of course, that reduces your future returns.
The valuations is one thing, but you've got to actually achieve the earnings. Is it possible to predict earnings out 5 or 10 years with confidence anymore?
No, I think it's hard to get way better results than what might be called normal results from investing. Just think of the investment advisors now that are lagging the, say, S&P index in America. It must be 99% of all the professionals.
Well, you did say to me once that at the moment you feel a bit like Rip Van Winkle. Is that the case?
Well, I do feel a little like Rip Van Winkle because this is a very different world from what I'm used to. I find the millennials very peculiar. I don't know what they're like in Australia, but here they're very peculiar.
In what way?
Very self-centered and very leftist.
Well, just following on through there, as a result, whether it's a result of the millennials or what, but the changes and developments in many industries have been extraordinary. Things like, well, energy, automobiles, banking, just to name a few. Do any of those industries hold a particular fascination for you at the moment? What's going on?
Well, everything is very interesting, and Warren feels the same way. We both agree that we find it so interesting that if we could hang around for another 30 years but not participate, but just watch, we both accept it because it's so interesting. The internet, of course, has changed things drastically. And think of what's disappeared. The monopoly newspapers whose overlords used to run the civilization, they're basically almost gone.
What about the banking industry?
Well, the banking industry has been rescued a couple of times. So it would have been dead if it hadn't been rescued.
It's well known you've been a strong believer in the future of China, and indeed have made many investments there, obviously. Have recent events there altered your thinking as the attractiveness of China going forward or not?
Well, almost every capitalist is less enthusiastic about China than he was a year ago. But I am not despairing at all about China. I don't think we're going to have a nuclear war. And if we don't have one, I think the only thing to do is to get along with China. And I think both China and the United States will be smart enough to see that. And I think we'll reach an acceptable relationship. Nothing could be more crazy in either China or the United States than failing to get along with the other one. It would be absolutely insane for either country to do anything but emphasize getting along with the other.
What needs to change there to sort of enact that? I mean, Obviously,
Yes, well, there's no question about the fact that the Chinese government has cracked down some on exuberant capitalism, but I think they've been right in a lot of what they've been doing. I think they're right to step hard on booms to not let them go too far. And I think the extent that my country doesn't do that, we're inferior to China. They're acting in a more adult fashion than we are. And I think they were right to step down so hard on corruption. And I think the guy who's running China has done a lot right.
there are some follow-on issues though there for the rest of the world with supply chain economics. I mean, China's so important these days, and we're seeing that, of course, with chips.
There's been nothing like in the history of the world. No big company has come up so fast as China. And Adam Smith must be cheering from his gravesite, because all they did to change from being mired in dire poverty was just adopt Smithian capitalism. But I think they were right to cut back on some of the exuberances that come to the financial part of Smithian capitalism. And I think that was a smart thing to do. I don't think the exuberant financiers all over the world do very little good. They always go to great excess.
In terms of some of the specifics there, I mean, I know we talked about some of those industries. So you've made a very well-known, well-publicised investment in BYD, which of course cuts across quite a lot of interesting disruptive forces, such as all the batteries.
Yes,
if you like.
But I regard BYD as having deserved its success. I think it's been a hugely clever company technologically, exceptionally hardworking, and exceptionally quality oriented, exceptionally engineering dominated. So I think China's proud of BYD and should be proud of it. It's one of the best companies in the world.
Well, as you know, Australia, I suppose, has been a major beneficiary of the rise of China over the past couple of decades. Is that sort of how you see it? Is that how you see Australia, a large quarry? Is that where?
Well, I think Australia was very lucky to have China get so prosperous, because you're doing so well selling minerals and coal and so forth to China. And so I think it's been a huge blessing to Australia economically to have China rise so fast, don't you?
Well, totally. I know we would be in real trouble without them, I'm sure. Well, at least 2 decades, even 3, really.
Yeah, well, I think Australia, with its deep involvement in China, can be in a constructive position. Australia can encourage both the United States and China to be more reasonable.
And just back on energy again, I mean, we talked about that a second, we can follow up there. Are you actually, well, bullish is the right word, but are you very interested in terms of where the disruptive forces in energy are going towards renewable energy? I mean, Berkshire Hathaway has made a commitment to that area.
I would be in favor of using a lot more renewable energy from wind and solar, even if there were no global warming problem. I think saving the hydrocarbons for future generations instead of blowing them all in one big blast, I think would be a very smart thing to do, even if there were no global warming.
Charlie, you've also mentioned many times about the benefits, as you've called it, of having a variety of mental models in your head, as will help you understand companies and investments better. Just want to elaborate a bit more on that concept. I think it's sort of well known, but we'd like to hear from you.
Everybody uses mental models. Science is mental models. So all of modernity is mental models. Of course, I'm in favor of mental models.
But in terms of parlaying that, if you like, into better understanding investments and companies, how do you sort of mix and meld? What do you need to, as a youngster, someone trying to learn this, what do you do?
I have a very simplistic way of proceeding. I think all successful investment is value investing, in the sense that you're trying to get better prospects than you're paying for. You get more value than you're paying for. And you can search for that in different places. You can search for that in great companies. You can search for it from medium quality companies that are just still worth a lot more than they're selling for in the market. As I've gotten older and older, I more and more emphasize the great companies. because it works better, and it works better tax-wise too for a taxable entity like a Munger family.
Well, with such mental models, if you like, in your head, is it easier then to compile like a checklist to solve an investment problem? I mean, that certainly works well with medical problems. Does it work with investment as well?
Yeah, sure it does. The checklist is fine. It's interesting, you know, Sherlock Holmes came from a doctor who was he modeled Sherlock Holmes on some medical professor, and of course it worked as literature because it works in real life.
So what are some of those things you check off mentally?
It's very interesting. Do you concentrate on more on what can go wrong or what can go right? And I concentrate on both. But I think if there's any slight preference, I really try and avoid what can go wrong. If you asked me how to help India, I would immediately reverse the question and say, what could I do that would really be sure to hurt India? And I'd figure out the 10 things I could do that would do the most damage. And then I'd meticulously avoid those 10 things. That's just the way I think. And I think if you think that way, you're likely to do less damage than the ordinary social scientist trying to be a politician.
Well, look, this discussion is really about you and your thoughts, but it'd be remiss of me not to mention Berkshire and your partner. So what is it that's made your partnership with Warren so successful, do you think, over the years?
Well, I think that we've been more successful for a reason that very few comment about. And I don't think that we're that smart. I don't think we're that diligent. We've had more success than our smartness and diligence would normally cause. And I attribute that to the fact that I think we're better than most people at knowing what we know and what we don't know. In other words, we pretty well know which ideas we have are better than other ideas, and most other people don't. We're just a little more shrewd about knowing the edge of our own competency. And that's a gift from God. And that really prevents a lot of trouble. And one of the reasons Berkshire has done so well is I think both Warren and I kind of know pretty well when we know something and when we don't. And the ordinary human experience is to be way overconfident in your own ideas, particularly if you've worked hard for them and expressed them to other people. So the world is full of insanely overconfident people. And of course, they make lots of mistakes.
But have you developed over time with Warren? I mean, that thinking, is that sort of something that was there from day one, or has it really evolved?
Well, I think it evolves, but I think it was partly genetic. Everything is partly genetic and partly culture.
So let's get something quite specific here. When we look at great businesses with growth and longevity, you often find similar underlying characteristics. You've often described Costco as an example of an outstanding business. So what really pleases you most about the Costco model?
Well, I'm so extreme about Costco that it would be fair to say that I really love Costco. I think Costco is full of people that have the right culture. They're trying to get ahead by serving the customer extremely well. Of course, they want to serve the employees well too. They want to do right by everybody. And there's an extreme discipline of wanting to be efficient and wanting to provide extreme value to the customers. And that has proven to be a perfectly wonderful model. And of course, I like being associated with it. There aren't many companies that have been as successful as Costco in their niche. There are other retailers that are bigger in terms of profit, but I don't think there's a more admired retailer in the world than Costco. They've come a long way.
How important is the subscription?
Look at the way they sell in Australia.
Yes.
Everybody in Australia just mobs the Costco stores. And of course, the same happens in China and Taiwan, and Korea, and so forth. And I think we're all lucky to have Costco, don't you?
Absolutely, but I think the subscription element is very important. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, I knew the founder very well, And he was very interesting. He said, part of intelligent business is knowing the business that you don't want and keeping it out. And of course, Saul Price did not want in his store people who shoplifted, people who wrote bad checks, and people who clogged up the parking lot without buying very much. So he created that membership system with pretty tough requirements to get in. And he kept all these people the hell out of his stores. Of course it succeeded. You can make it very efficient.
Well, just following on then, how would you compare them to the other great modern retailing phenomenon, Amazon?
Well, they're radically different. Amazon, of course, rode a new development, the development of the internet, to become a powerhouse in the United States. But it's radically different. I really think that over the long pull, Costco may have more, Amazon may have more to fear from Costco in terms of retailing than Costco has, than the reverse. I think Costco will eventually be a huge internet player.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, people trust it, and they have enormous purchasing power they can use to reduce prices. And they're into very efficient forms of distribution. Who would you like least to compete with in the world of the future? I would regard it as a sentence from hell if I had to compete with Costco.
Can we just talk about inflation for a moment then, Charlie? Over the years, have you thought of the prospect or occurrence of rising inflation as a great risk or even an opportunity for investors? And how would you best deal with it, with inflation?
Well, I think that if you took practically any currency in the world, a banknote, just an ordinary piece of currency out of your wallet, and stuck it in your safe deposit box and took it out 100 years from now, I think you could confidently expect that it'll buy practically nothing. So over 100 years, I don't trust any currency issued in the whole world. None. I think it's natural to reduce the purchasing powers of currency slowly if you're a government. The best you can hope for is the inflation will be slow.
So in terms of just applying that to investment, as I said, do you see that that's obviously a great risk just for the passive power of
course, it makes investment very difficult.
So do you particularly seek out businesses that can float on the surface of inflation when you're looking at equities?
Well, think about it. Can you think of a company in the world almost that's better protected against inflation than Costco? Costco pays its suppliers for its merchandise after its customers have paid Costco. So they automatically earn more money if there's inflation. I'm not for inflation for that reason. In other words, I hope we never have any inflation. But if we do, Costco's about as well positioned as any company on earth.
So in terms of, so we talk about the debasing, if you like, of national currencies, the results there. Some people think you can sort of protect against that inflation from that debasement by investing in alternatives such as cryptocurrencies. What do you think of that notion? And cryptocurrencies more generally?
Well, as you well know, I'm never going to buy a cryptocurrency.
I know that.
I wish they'd never been invented. And again, I admire the Chinese. I think the Chinese made the correct decision, which is just simply ban them. And my country, English-speaking civilization, has made the wrong decision. They just can't stand participating in these insane booms one way or another. If it seems to be working, everybody wants to pile in. And I have a different attitude. I want to make my money by selling people things that are good for them, not things that are bad for them. And believe me, the people who are creating cryptocurrencies are not thinking about the customer, they're thinking about themselves. Just look at them. I wouldn't want any one of them to marry into my family.
And while we're on that sort of talk about inflation as well, but I mean, a natural consequence is interest rates moving up. Do you think we're in an environment now where we're going to see a continual rise in interest rates over a period of time?
I have not made my way in life by predicting interest rates. Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, that case would be pretty poor. Mine's no good either.
Well, that's mine too. I try and operate in such a way that whatever happens, I'll do okay.
Yeah, you've done pretty well so far. All right, well, we'll leave that one alone. Just going back to one of your favourite philosophers, Seneca, the great Roman philosopher, who was obviously obsessed with time, and he famously once said that time discovers truth, which I always thought was a great quote. Do you think that's a very sensible maxim with regard to investment? I mean, time really is the friend of the great business and the enemy of the poor business, which gets found out.
Well, of course that's true, but that's almost a tautology. Of course, the great business is going to succeed over time. That's how we define a great business, as one who succeeds over time. That's like saying red is red.
But I suppose what I mean is that you're right. We should be aiming to find those great businesses and let time do the work, I suppose what I mean.
Yes, it's getting very difficult because we have a vast increase in the intellectual horsepower that's trying to get rich by owning securities. And so they bid the good businesses up and up and up and up. In America, at least, almost every great business is selling at 35 times earnings or more. That makes it very much harder for the investor.
Hard to get in, but if you're already holding them, then the compounding will still work at a greater rate.
Well, no, even if you're holding them, your future is not as good as your past.
Yeah, that's fair.
In the past, you had all the growth, plus the thing went from a 10 multiple to a 35 multiple. And so you feel like a genius. But that doesn't mean it's going to go up at that same rate in the future.
So how do you feel generally about highly regulated industries? I mean, some believe that a tough regulatory environment is hard to invest in, obviously, as you're clearly restricted in what you can do. But others quite like these industries, provided you're the dominant player, as it obviously imposes barriers to entry to new entrants. What's your view? Any examples there?
I like making banks be sensible instead of go crazy when everybody else goes crazy. So I like regulation that if banks are going to use the government's credit to attract money, which they do, and be an important part of the whole monetary policy of the surrounding civilization, I think that they should be regulated to make sure they behave sensibly. And I don't feel that way about people who are trying to sell kitchen utensils. And so, but I like regulation of some industries. And of course, I like safety regulations. Just think of what awful things we'd have being sold to people who are desperate if there were no pharmaceutical regulation. You take medicine before, say, 1850, the average person going to the average doctor was more likely to be hurt than helped. People were selling all these quack remedies. And that was a very bad time in the history of civilization. It's gotten way better in the last 150 years. And by the way, most of that improvement came in the United States and came as a result of Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. So these super rich guys were the ones who gave us modern medicine.
By funding it through the medical research, you mean?
Well, no, they changed the laws of the United States and the practices of medicine. They made every medical school imitate Johns Hopkins, which was a good model. They really changed the world for the better.
But in terms of the investment side, again, I'm always trying to drag this back to investment. This is an investment conference. But are you saying, therefore, that the stronger pharmaceutical companies benefit because of the regulations? And so investing there, or are you saying the banks are better investors?
Yes, of course we want regulation.
We want that from society.
Think of how the temptation, Purdue was in the pharmaceutical business. Think of how they yielded to temptation. There's always going to be somebody who's going to do that. And some of those scumballs belong in the lowest circle of hell. They don't belong in modern business. And I'm glad that regulation finally came down on Purdue.
Well, Berkshire's certainly had its share of smaller companies in its portfolio, particularly in the early days when it had less money, naturally. But it's never really been an early stage investor. Venture capital, on the other hand, has become extremely popular. There have been some incredibly successful VC firms in recent times, producing amazing returns. So can we just unpack that a bit? I mean, what are your views on venture capital?
Well, my view is that I don't think I'm particularly well suited for it. I think if I had gone into the same business that Sequoia is in, I would not have done as well as Sequoia has done. But that's true of practically everybody. Sequoia has like the best investment record in the world. And I don't know how to do what they do. I regard it as a minor miracle. I think they're helped some now by their reputational effects. I think they see more good deals than other people. And I think that helps them maintain the record. But they didn't have that to start with. They came up from nothing. And no, I think venture capital is, the people who've done it best have the most amazing records I've ever seen. But I don't feel I have any great aptitude for that line of work.
But there seems to be an increasingly...
It's full of people who know a lot about pharmaceuticals, who know a lot about computer science. They know a lot of things I don't know. So I don't play on their game.
But it seems to be a very...
Once in a while I get in kind of by accident.
It's become a much more, a bigger part of many people's portfolios, though, the early stage investments.
Well, it certainly has. That's what happens when something is screamingly successful. If you take venture capital out of the portfolios of the great American universities, all of their great records are, almost all of them revert to ordinary. It's venture capital that's made the universities in America do so well.
Particularly the ones that have had Sequoia.
Yes, particularly those that have had Sequoia.
Okay. So just, I suppose, to wrap it up a little bit, but do you think your investment philosophy, if you want to call it that, has changed with age? I mean, do you look at things differently now?
No, I'm still looking for more value than I pay for. And what's changed is I am more interested in the great companies. And that has made it particularly hard for me because the great companies have become so high priced. And you have the same problem. I think you understand things very well. In fact, if you're happy with what you're facing, I think you don't understand it very well. I think it's gotten more difficult for the shrewd player.
So there has been more emphasis on trying to identify the next great company, if you like.
It doesn't help you if it's already 50 times earnings. There's no great company that can't be turned into a bad investment just by raising the price. They're none of them worth infinity.
Charlie, you've often used the phrase, and using one many times I've seen, the Lollapalooza system. What do you really mean by that? Any current examples of a Lollapalooza?
Well, yes, I think when you have a very extreme outcome of any kind, it's likely to have multiple causes all bearing toward the same result. That's what I call the Lollapalooza effect. That's what made Coca-Cola so successful. 4 or 5 things converged to make it successful. And that's what caused most extreme success. I'm sure if you looked into Sequoia deeply, you'd find 4 or 5 things together are working in favor of Sequoia. That's the way it almost always is. Almost every successful man is a result of hard work, intelligence, grit, and luck. Because an outlier is almost certain to have had benefit from all those factors.
Is there something out there that you've seen recently that you say, wow, that is the most recent example of a Lollapalooza effect?
Well, anything where multiple causes are working in the same direction. Costco is helped by multiple causes at once. The rise of China actually helped Costco. For years and years and years, there was almost no inflation in what was going through the Costco stores. And that was largely the rise of China that was contributing to that result. And that helped Costco. all the real outliers are likely to have had 3 or 4 things helping in the same direction at once. And Costco had the right incentive system. It was in the right location. It was the right place. Several things were working together.
So when you think of the great business leaders and visionaries that you've encountered over the years, there's been lots of them, and then look at the current crop today, how do you think people like Jeff Bezos and, say, Elon Musk compare with the great titans of the past?
They're radically different people. And they're both talented. And Bezos was the valedictorian of his class in high school, the valedictorian of his class at Princeton, and that was in the double engineering, electrical engineering. He's a very brilliant man, and he's worked very hard, and he's somewhat fanatic, and of course he's had a remarkable result. And he caught a big wave on purpose and played it harder than almost anybody else. And so it's an interesting example of a Lollapalooza because Jeff Bezos. Now, he wouldn't have been so successful if there hadn't been an internet wave for him to ride. But there was an internet wave, and when he saw it, he got aboard. He threw aside everything else in his life and just headed for the top of that wave, and he's been surfing ever since. Musk is a interesting case. He's also very able, but he thinks he's even more able than he is, and that's helped him. I have a saying I picked up from Howard Amundsen, that is, never underestimate the man who overestimates himself. Obviously, some of the extreme successes are going to come from people who try very extreme things because they're overconfident. And when they succeed, why, there you get Elon Musk. He's very talented and very aggressive. Of course, he's had a remarkable record.
All right, just switching for a second then, it's sort of vaguely related, but would you own an airline or an airport?
I prefer the airport. The airport is protected from competition, and the airline suffers some horrible competition. So of course I'd rather be invested in the airport. So would you.
Well, it was a rhetorical question. I was surprised if you said anything else. Let's try something else then. Have you ever owned a commodity business? I think you were told me once you owned a boron mine, but you tend to avoid commodities normally.
I probably have had 1 or 2 little flutters in commodities in my life, but basically you're right, I avoid them.
Although in Australia, of course, we own a lot of commodities here, and it's been in some ways.
Well, but you have big open pit mines in a good climate. So Australia has been very lucky in the way it's been developed. And I think the Australians can be pretty damn proud of themselves. I think Australia, starting at a penal colony, has done amazingly well in the world. And I think it's a credit to civilization how well Australia has done. So I have very good feelings about Australia, but of course I like New Zealand and Canada and so forth too. But if you ask me, the period of real greatness in English-speaking civilization, it's not recently, it's way back. If you take England, after the fall of Napoleon and before the start of World War I, 100 years, that little tiny island in the North Sea utterly led civilization. Number 2 wasn't close. They led in the Industrial Revolution, they led in every way. And they spread that achievement all over the world. And it was simply incredible. And the way they did it, it was the most, 300 families owned most of the land in England. The rich families ran the government as a matter of noblesse oblige. It was the most oligarchic democracy you practically have ever seen in the history of the world. And all I can say is it led in that status, it led the world for 100 years. That is a very interesting thing, and I think it has lessons for us. Now every democracy is trying to be more and more direct democracy. But I think the historical experience would suggest that we would have been better off to stick to something more hierarchical. And you notice that the most successful subparts of modern democracy are not democratic at all. The Mayo Clinic, Harvard University, the Catholic Church, they're not democracies. Our most admired institutions are not democracies. And it's only a few places that have made democracy work well. And one of them is Australia and another is the United States. But look at the way democracies worked in Latin America, or look at the way it works in India. Not at all well. The historical record would not suggest that direct democracy is the way to go. The probably would have all been better off if it stayed more hierarchical, more oligarchic.
Well, you've always been a great
like
fan
a meritocratic oligarchic, like the Catholic Church or something.
No.
By the time you're a cardinal in the Catholic Church, you're a pretty talented fellow.
Well, Lee Kuan Yew, you rate very highly.
Oh, I think Lee Kuan Yew is the greatest nation builder who ever lived. Now, it was a small nation, but in terms of what he achieved from what he started, nobody had a result like Lee Kuan Yew. And by the way, that turned out to be pretty damn oligarchic. Almost, it sort of drifted into being a one-party state. You don't get to be a prominent member of the leading party in Singapore just by being a good rabble rouser for the mob. It takes talent. I think we'd all like to be under leadership that was more like what Singapore has. Let me ask you, turn the questions. Wouldn't you like a touch more of Singapore in your own country?
At times, certainly. At times, we definitely feel that way.
Yeah.
Now, just something more for the students, I suppose. Well, I consider myself a student. When you get a set of financial statements of a company that you're hearing about for the first time, what's the first line of the P&L on the balance sheet that you immediately go to? What do your eye gets drawn to?
Certainly, if you're looking for great companies, you want companies that have high earnings on capital and have a durable competitive advantage. And if you can add to that, they've got a good management instead of a bad one, well, that's a big plus too. But what you'll find is that a lot of people have found the great companies of the world have been discovered, and they're very expensive to buy. And if you're wrong, if something happens to them, like Kodak was a very admirable company that led the world for a long, long time. And basically the shareholders went to zero. That can happen. They got blindsided by technological change.
Well, Charlie, look, it pains me to say this, but I think our allotted time is up, and the other speakers are sort of queued up behind us here. It's been fabulous, and we really can't thank you enough for your time and openness. I know you've actually never made it to Australia. You went to New Zealand fishing once. You haven't been to Australia. There's quite a few medical research institutes here.
I've been to Australia. I like Australia.
Oh, you did come? I didn't think you did.
I fished in North Australia. I like Australia.
Well, as I said, there'll be quite a few medical research institutes here now that will benefit enormously from the money raised today by the Hearts and Minds Conference. So you've been a major part of that fundraising initiative. So again, from all of us, thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Charlie. That's not a Coke you were drinking, is it, Charlie?
Of course it's Coke.
Sorry, I was just checking. Thank you. Well done.
Diet Coke, yes.
Diet Coke. Good, watch it. So, again, we'll stay in this
By the way, think of this business. The ingredient cost of that is practically zero. Yet I pay a lot of money to swill it. Now that is a business.